In today's episode, we bring back one of our audience's favorite guests, Dr. Todd Ovokaitys. Dr. Todd is such a wealth of information that we just had to have him back for our series on trauma recovery. Join us as Dr. Todd explains the fascinating approach of mind-body logic and psycho-emotional medicine so that we can discover the underlying primary unresolved conflict behind any illness. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us again. And before we get into today's episode with Dr. Todd, I just had a couple of announcements to make. One of the important ones initially is that, as you know, we are doing the trauma series, and the trauma series is 15 different guests that we round out this really large topic on trauma and how to recover from it. And we talk to lots of different people from lots of different perspectives. And the whole point of this is so that you get a chance to try on and get a feel and see what you resonate with and what you don't resonate with. And ultimately, we believe that at this point in time, it's incredibly important to be collectively working with our individual traumas and clear as much stuff as we can. So we're bringing in lots of different guests with wealth of information so that you can start to figure out, where do you want to begin? What resonates with you? Where do you want to start? Now, normally we do episodes once a week. Now, if you haven't joined the Dr. Jason Loken ND YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe to that, because we do live events that are through YouTube with the guests about within the week after their episode is released, as well as we will be putting together specific roundtable discussions where we bring several of the guests back together and we do a roundtable discussion and answer a bunch of your questions. So the other thing that I'm doing is I'm doing a couple of bonus episodes. There's a couple of different people that I wanted to also talk to around trauma, and then we're going to release those as a bonus episode. So those will probably be going out on a Wednesday. So I think if this is Monday, Dr. Todd's episode is out, look for Wednesday for the next episode to come out. And then I think the following week we'll do another bonus episode. Now, the first one that's going to come out on Wednesday is a really important episode. So for those of you that maybe aren't aware, or if you are, there was a mass graveyard of 215 Native children that was discovered in Kamloops, BC recently. And this has kind of shaken the foundation of a lot of people in Canada, and particularly our Indigenous community. And so we wanted to reach out and talk to someone that's actually quite a close friend of ours, Daryl Williams, and he's a Mohawk elder. And we wanted to get his perspective on how is the Indigenous community doing. This has been an ongoing issue for generations, and there is so much transgenerational trauma that has taken place throughout the Indigenous community from literally this mass genocide that they have been going through. And we wanted to talk to someone within that community. And Daryl is an elder in that community and a very spiritual person. And he talks to us about how to start to heal trauma within the community and also outside of that community. So the lessons that Daryl shares are sage words of advice for anybody dealing with trauma. So I hope that you tune in, because I think that's a very important episode for everybody to listen to at this point in time. And the other episode I'm going to do the following Wednesday, I believe, will be with Ken Schwartz, the CEO and founder of C60 Purple Power. So I want to bring in the importance of supporting brain function, brain inflammation, anxiety, depression, a lot of these sequelae to trauma. So whether that's even physical trauma, like brain trauma, or whether that is mental, emotional trauma, either way, supporting the inflammatory pathways, supporting the antioxidant pathways that C60 does. That's that incredible carbon-60, very powerful antioxidant that has an array of different health benefits. I want to break that down in detail for people so that they understand some of the different physiological pathways that they can do to support their biology. Because what you hear from some of the different speakers is they'll talk about lots of different areas, but one of the areas not to neglect is the importance of actually fixing even the physiology, so that we can then even start to approach and work on some of the aspects of the mental, emotional pieces that we need to work with. So healthy diet, movement, slowing things down, meditation. You're going to see a lot of this kind of stuff at different times, as well as a lot of the other specific approaches that these speakers talk about. I've been using C60 regularly for the last couple of months. And I notice generally, I think my brain feels like it functions a little bit clearer. I definitely can tell a difference because I take it both orally and I put it on my face every evening. And I definitely have seen a change in some of the wrinkle lines that I've got around my eyes. So outside of those, there's so many other benefits. So take a look on their website. Just go to inspirehealthpodcast.com or check the link in the show notes on YouTube, and you will be directed to their website on my website on inspirehealthpodcast.com. Just click the top right corner where it says get 15% off your order. It will take you to the Purple Power C60 site, and from there just put in the promo code, all capitals, DRLOKEN, and you'll get 15% off your order. It's free shipping in the States, but in Canada there would be some shipping costs. Now, in today's episode, we get to bring back Dr. Todd. So Dr. Todd, we came across him when we did the Science, Mysticism, and Beyond series. And my wife and I absolutely fell in love with Dr. Todd. He is probably one of the most brilliant people I have ever met, that is also almost equally brilliant from a creative standpoint and from a spiritual standpoint. He's a very well-rounded person, and just I feel like I could bring him back literally every week and pick his brain on things and just tap some more of his brilliance, because there's so much there. So Dr. Todd has a specialty in his practice outside of all of the other stuff he does with anti-aging and the pineal tones that we talked about in his episode with Science, Mysticism, and Beyond. But he also has a very specific area that he focuses on with psycho-emotional healing. And so we wanted to bring him back to really talk about this and how it works. And one of the main aspects of the things that he works with is called mind-body logic. And essentially, this wasn't a technique that he developed, but he's learned a lot about, and now he teaches these courses along with some other people. And at the heart of it is that underlying any illness, any disease, is an unresolved conflict. And as long as that unresolved conflict exists, the disease process will continue. And it actually can be incredibly specific. They can break it right down. And in our episode, he goes through a lot of different conditions in different areas and explains what the underlying conflict usually is. And once that awareness is brought up, and then we are able to work with the conflict and resolve the conflict, many times the illness just starts to disappear. So join us in this episode because I think it's just fascinating, and Dr. Todd is really quite brilliant. He, even at the end, he actually talks about what the primary conflict is from a mind-body logic perspective for SARS-CoV-2, the virus, which I think was also incredibly fascinating. So dive into this episode, and I hope you really enjoy it. And Dr. Todd will also be joining us for a live Q&A after show, and that will be Sunday, June 20th, which is Father's Day, at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. So in the episode here that you're going to be listening to, please go to the YouTube channel and write down some questions for us to ask Dr. Todd. So anything that you want to know, ask the questions. If you can come on the show live, then join the link live. It will be through the YouTube channel as well as our Facebook page. So Dr. Jason Loken ND, both YouTube channel and Facebook page, and you'll be able to connect to either one of those to watch the live stream. At the live stream, you can also leave questions. So ask questions while you're there. If you have any specific ones that pop up, throw them up there and let's see if we can get Dr. Todd to answer as many of them as we can. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the episode and I look forward to talking to you soon. Bye-bye. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. And as we continue on with our new series on trauma recovery from surviving to thriving. And today we've brought back Dr. Todd Ovokaitys. So if you have been following our show, we've had Dr. Todd, I think 3 times now, Dr. Todd.
I believe so.
Yeah, so if you haven't checked out Dr. Todd's work, we have to keep bringing him back and tap his brilliance, because Dr. Todd has so much expertise in very diverse areas. And so this being one of them with the work that we're going to share today around psycho-emotional medicine. And if you haven't seen the episode we did before with Pineal Tones, he was in the Science, Mysticism, and Beyond series. And we can even talk about that towards the end, because I feel like that in itself plays a big role, probably on some capacity with trauma recovery. But I've gone through Dr. Todd's bio before in the past, but I'm going to pass it over to you, Dr. Todd, just kind of give an outline of who you are for everybody again. And then when they see the other episodes, they'll fill in all the gaps, but just pass it over to you there.
Sure. So
And
by background,
welcome back to the show.
thank you. I'll bring on with you and Taya too when she's available. The story, which is a little bit unusual for me, is that while I started in conventional medicine as a Johns Hopkins and Georgetown trained specialist in internal medicine with a subspecialty in pulmonary and critical care medicine, I got inspired to pursue something that would be called photoacoustics or biophysics, which has to do with how vibrations, and I started with light vibrations driven by lasers, how that interacts with tissue, how it interacts with biology. And we created a way to neutralize viruses without drugs. We created ways to enhance the biological activity of nutritional supplements and to regenerate tissue. We have now defined arguably the most efficient and effective way to awaken a dormant class of stem cells in the body and direct them where they can most be used to regenerate tissue. And without going into the details, we have more recent data showing that our treatments have the most profound measurable anti-aging effect of any methodology ever used before. And it all ties together into an interesting dynamic of ancient history, work that in some circles it's believed I've done in the ancient past with temples of rejuvenation to the current, doing similar work just with modernized technology that's more portable and doesn't require being on mountaintops where it's cold. So that's sort of where it begins. So I'm primarily a specialist in anti-aging medicine and regeneration, rejuvenation. And at the highest levels, if you really want to make the body younger, you also have to make the mind and psyche younger. So it also fits into the ways one uses mind, body, being, and spirit to enhance rejuvenation and regeneration, as well as to boost consciousness and capability as well. So, well, on the one hand, I'm a medical doctor. I'd say my greatest interest is in the realm of human performance and human capability. The pineal tones come into it. That's the vibrational aspect of enhancing the physical and physiologic and energetic experience of being a living Homo sapiens. And it goes back to ancient times where there are particular tones and tonal patterns that were used that kept the body young a very long time if you use them in certain ways, that also created profound cohesion in a community. And they're very therapeutic in their own right. And beyond what happened physically, they also, I would say, expanded the net of awareness, able to be and perceive at higher and more refined levels. The pineal tones work had its biggest debut at an event in Maui at the end of the Mayan calendar, December 21st, 2012, the day the world in some circles was believed to come to an end. And it's reinterpreted as the end of one cycle and the beginning of a new, and an opportunity to recreate our world. And Lord knows with all this COVID-19 stuff, we've had a big pattern interrupt. We have an opportunity to look at everything we've done and been and say, well, where do we want to go from here? And do we create a grassroots movements where we, the people, literally decide what kind of reality we want to create and do something independent of what political and other forces might impose upon us externally? So the pineal tones, as the sound vibrational correlate of the light vibrational correlate, is something that is profoundly enhancing. And as you say, may well have a role in terms of how to create such a state of awareness and relaxation that the body can heal from deep trauma and regenerate into a higher and higher condition.
Beautiful. Well, and why I mentioned that around how I think it could play a role in traumas. I just know how I feel when I'm listening to the different music. So the melody that you had recently sent to Tan and I to listen to, and as we were talking, when I'm listening to it, I guess to me, when I'm working with healing in some capacity, or just learning to even stay with sensation in my body for a longer period of time. I find that that's a really important aspect of things when it comes to healing, is just learning to stay with sensation that's arising in the body. And music can play such a really powerful, or tones can play a powerful way with sort of almost bringing certain sensation up and even anchoring it to some point. So I found when I would listen to that music, different emotions would come up at different places, and I'm not necessarily attaching them to a storyline or anything. So it's almost allowing it. What it feels like to me is it allows my emotions to actually metabolize. It's almost like giving a place for them to come up and allowing them to just kind of run their course and take me on a bit of a journey with it without me getting too attached to them in any way.
Right.
Now, let's talk about the psycho-emotional medicine specifically. So can you tell me a little bit about what psycho-emotional medicine is, and how you arrived at that specific branch of the work that you do?
Well, it's not that I'm the originator of it. I just learned about it and felt that it was a huge missing piece of the total equation. So the goal is to be healthy, pain-free, disease-free, enlightenment prone, awareness enhancing beings of higher and higher capability, then it's really a complete package. So any limitation that we have in our psyche or our being is going to continue to limit what we can be, whether it's health-wise or capability-wise or intellectually or creatively. The phrase psycho-emotional medicine is a pretty big grab bag and can include many, many things. I'm sure the different speakers that you will have, other than what I'm going to present, will have different flavors, different methods, different perspectives on what predisposes a person to trauma in the first place. And then if someone is traumatized, how do you peel off the layers of it, heal the underlying wound, repair the psyche and the tendencies to recreate that issue so that a person can literally be healed and recreated in a new way. More than just, putting a Band-Aid on it, more than glossing over it, to actually create a true transformative process where the trauma and the predispositions to trauma no longer are a limitation to that person, literally creating a new level of freedom and a new level of well-being. So with that as a preface, the specific area that I'm dubbing psycho-emotional medicine, and it really has a better phrase that I like from one of our mentors in the area, which is integrative psychobiology. And I believe that will encompass much of the information that other specialists in this area will provide. The root concept in this area, and it's had various names through the years. It was originally called the New German Medicine, developed by this super bright person named Dr. Hammer. And it had other names as it went through the years. It was taken further by a Frenchman named Claude Sabat. And then there are now 3 other leading pioneers, which are the ones that we work with and bring to teach, who are Enrique Buran from Uruguay, Dr. Fabian Brotos from Uruguay, and then we have our very own Isabel Benarus, who is French by origin and who is now in the LA area. And both she and Enrique were students of Claude Sabat, who was a student of the originator, Dr. Hammer. And the core concept of this, and now we tend to call it biological decoding. And there's even a biological decoding app for those who want to know the decodings for various things. And the reality is that it's somewhat helpful, but to really make use of the decodings, it's not just knowing what the conflict is for an issue, but what is the art of something that is buried deep in the psyche and literally hidden from consciousness, because it creates greater safety for that person, at least in their perceived experience, if they bury it, as opposed to making it present in their awareness so that they can process and release it. The core concept in this whole area is that a severe shock lived in isolation then creates a dynamic in the brain where, to keep from this trauma becoming so overwhelming that all we ever do is think about it all day long, it keeps us from sleeping, it distracts us and exhausts us, that rather than be in a state of distraction and exhaustion, which is what was the greatest danger to living creatures for millions of years. I mean, now if you say, well, what's the biggest threat to your survival? I mean, what are the leading causes of someone, not surviving? And you say, well, it might be heart disease or diabetes or lung disease or maybe COVID-19 these days, or the vaccine for that matter. That's a different story.
Mm-hmm. A whole different story.
a different subset of the total narrative here.
Yeah.
And that's not today's topic. Maybe another day it will
Maybe
be.
another day though.
that for millions of evolutionaries, actually billions, if you go back to the origins of life on the planet, the greatest threat to survival was either being exhausted or distracted, because in those states you were subject to a predator. And if you're a predator, it was unsafe to be exhausted or distracted. So this whole idea is that a severe trauma, if you don't express it in the moment, if you don't release that emotional content in the moment, it codes in the brain. And the extraordinary elegance of this system, and the reason I love it so much, even compared to other methods that have had powerful results. There are some methods that are general, and like NET, TFT, EFT, there's all those. And I'm sure through the course of what you do, you'll define, what those mean, like emotional freedom technique and EFT.
Neuro-emotional technique, NET.
Right, etc. And there are many others in those categories. Psyche, which Dr. Bruce Lipton has promoted and supported through his book, especially The Biology of Belief. And all these concepts are really integral. What I especially like about this system, biological decoding, is that there really is a precise psycho-emotional landscape that has been a cartography of the mind built over the past 4 decades. And what I mean by that is, based on the subjective experience of a traumatic or shocking event, that is how it encodes into the brain and into the biology. And let me give an example to clarify that. So one of the teaching metaphors is the story of the fox and the hare. And in this story, the fox is really hungry and is looking for food, and is very excited and relieved when he sees a rabbit, and quickly kills the rabbit and is about to eat it. And just as it's about to enjoy its well-needed meal, because he's starving, he hears wolves. So he has a choice. He can either take his time and eat the rabbit properly, in which case he himself becomes food, or he can bite off a leg and run away. So he does the latter because survival instincts take over. And now he has something in his stomach that really is essentially indigestible. It's not really designed to eat the whole thing, hair and bones and all. And in this metaphor, he adapts to that situation by creating a super stomach. So the stomach actually, under that need, begins to build more layers, creates more cells that make acid and digestive juices. And this super stomach, with its augmented acid and digestive juices, are able to digest the leg. And once that's done, though, once he no longer has the need for a super stomach, then his biology supervenes and his brain supervenes. It's okay, well, I don't need these extra cells anymore. And they literally slough off. They might even actually have some bleeding for a while when that unneeded stomach lining sloughs off. Now, let's do an alternative story. And let's say that a person helps somebody out. They didn't really know them that well, but there's someone who's sort of down and out. They don't have a job. They don't even have a home. And they take this person in, they give them a job, they give them a trusted position, they build them up, and he has a thriving company. And then out of the blue, this person that he saved basically then steals all the money. Say there's $2 million in the bank account, and he takes every penny and he's gone. So this isn't a rabbit bone in the stomach, but it's an indigestible situation. He can't digest this experience that the person that he helped so much could do this to him. And in the realm of decoding, rather than be completely consumed. So the first thing that would tend to happen is then you would just think over and over, how did I do this? Why did I do this? Why did I let him do it? Why didn't I take precautions? Why did I not see the signs? Why didn't I have precautions? Why didn't I have insurance? I mean, all these things. So the person could be literally not sleep, not eat, not drink, and be so totally exhausted and distracted that he might get run over by a bus the next day because he's not paying attention. And there are dangers out there. Not lions and tigers and bears anymore, but there's still dangers in the modern world. And in the context of this style of psycho-emotional medicine, the basic concept is that the function of the subconscious is to do its best to ensure our survival into the next moment. Doesn't care about a year from now, not even a month from now, not even a day from now, not even an hour from now. It concerns about our surviving into the next moment. And the brain has as its material to work with the cells of the body. So in this concept, many conditions in the body are the brain creating a solution. So most types of tumors, for example, in the psycho-emotional sense, would be considered the brain creating a super organ for a survival purpose. So in the case of the friend, or probably not a friend anymore, the person who you befriended and gave a job that stole all the money, that's an indigestible experience, and it translates to creating a super stomach. So like the hair that created extra cells so it could digest something indigestible, the brain can give the same signals, through the evolutionary history. If you need a super stomach, you create more cells. And without relief of that issue, more and more cells will pile up. And biologically, if an endoscope were passed into the stomach and a heaped up area was seen and a biopsy was taken, it would look like a stomach cancer. And because there isn't an end to it, because the bone doesn't digest, that process will continue unless the emotional driver for that process is not interrupted.
Okay. So
far?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand where and when I was going through the material, I was like, this reminds me of New German medicine. I was even, I think we're even going to have someone actually on this series talking about New German medicine as well. So it'll be a nice sort of segue. And I know
Sure.
in some of the work I've done before, I've done some work with New German medicine. And essentially, like for people that aren't familiar with that, it's this idea where these emotional shocks can then be basically the emotional shock and then the unresolvement around that emotional shock that then basically creates changes in the biology, and then we start to see what we would term as a disease or a pathology that would show up in the body.
Right.
So if we take that from, say, an example for trauma, because
Well,
I think
let me complete the discussion. So
sorry, go ahead.
There's a more complete understanding of it. So that when we talk about trauma in general, there will be a context for understanding it. Because every type of trauma occurs only because we have the psychoemotional predisposition to create it for ourselves.
Yeah, that's an important topic that I want to pull into, because that one's sometimes a hard one for people to understand or to grasp, but I think that's a really important foundational one to really break that cycle of trauma from occurring
Right.
over and over and over again. So I'm really glad you brought that up. So yes,
Right.
carry on.
Well, I'm going to first broaden the perspective and then narrow down on this specific situation. So what's important to the brain and the biology is not so much the incident, not so much the physical details of what was happening in the material world. What's critically important is the perceived experience of it. So with this scenario where your best friend and a person whose life you resurrected or salvaged and you think should be incredibly loyal to you, your best friend who has now stolen all the money and ruined you, one way of experiencing that is as something that is indigestible, and then it will affect the stomach. It could be interpreted as the perceived experience that, oh my God, I don't have any money, I'm going to be lacking, and the stress of lack will go to the liver. Or it may be, oh my God, I'm abandoned and alone, and the abandonment conflict will basically cause the person to behave in such a way that they gain a lot of weight. So weight gain, overweight, even obesity, the core conflict is abandonment, because the way we survived in the wild, if we're abandoned, is we get big. Either we get big or we get like lean and fast. So you either get big so you can scare off the predator, or you get small and lean so you can slip through cracks and run away. One or the other, it goes either way. The conflict could be, God, I'm such an idiot, how could I do that? And have an intellectual evaluation, and that'll affect the brain. That's how, in the psycho-emotional medical world, a person can create brain cancer, or the most aggressive being glioblastoma, an intellectual evaluation. It could be the conflict of separation, because it's your best friend and you want to be around him, and it'll affect the skin. So depending upon, or it can be a conflict that I won't have the money to survive, and it's a threat to actual survival, and it'll affect the lungs, because the lungs are living, literally breathing into the next moment. So you can see the same events can have quite a different perceived experience, or it can be, nah, it's usually about the second or third year that the people steal all the money. It's what I expect, I'll get a loan and I'll be okay. Or it could be not a stress at all. It probably would be, but not everything that you think would be a big stress may be a big stress. And there may be no adverse consequence from it. So part of understanding the way we work, the way our brains and psyches work, and how to unravel it and free ourselves of these debilitating unconscious conflicts that limit what we can do in our human potential, and which can translate themselves in our biology to diseases, is really this understanding that it's our perceived experience that's critically important, and that part of our goal is to resolve conflicts, whether there's things that happened in our recent lives, whether things that happened in our childhood, whether they're stresses that occurred that we took on even during gestation, or whether they are conflicts that are from our ancestors that have not been resolved for our clan. We take on that as well. Mm-hmm. And there are interesting factors. For example, if you're named after someone in your genealogy, then in this context, you were born to solve their unresolved conflicts. If you have the same birthday as someone in your genealogy, you were born to resolve that which they didn't resolve. Yeah.
No pressure, but
no pressure whatsoever.
But you know what that reminds me of, Dr. Todd? Tay and I were at a conference with Dr. Peter Levine once, and he does somatic experiencing. And he was actually doing some work with, he was showing a video where he was doing some work with some Aboriginal members of the community that had gone through, their ancestors had gone through really atrocious trauma. And he was saying very much the same sort of thing, and sort of this generational trauma that can be passed along. Mm-hmm. And that in the healing of those individuals at that point, when they actually resolved the trauma, when they healed it, that actually, and from their words, they felt that ripple back, is that it actually healed the trauma from their ancestors as well.
Right. Yeah, that is a basic principle, that if you heal a conflict in yourself, you heal it not only for your generations to come, not just for you, your children and grandchildren and beyond, but also for your ancestors going back up the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's actually really beautiful to think of it like that. Mm-hmm. And also in many ways, I know even when Tay and I, before we even had babies, before we started babies, we actually sat and had a conversation around, as much as we could bring to the conscious mind, what were some of our big conflicts that we were working with. And the goal was to actually work on resolving them before we had children, in order to try to do the best that we could to not pass those on along the chain. So I do think it's a really important thing for people to look at. Now, I think a really important part is, so it's the perceived experience that causes all of the troubles. So right. Then the question is, so once we even maybe see or understand the conflict, how do we work with changing the perceived experience? Because right. That seems to be that's the part that grabs everybody, it's hard to change. If you're only looking at something from this one perspective, it's hard to actually genuinely feel something different unless you can find a way to see it from different perspectives. So what's the process to assist people with that?
Mm-hmm. Excellent question, and really the next part of the discussion. So we have our person who's developed a stomach cancer because of the indigestible experience that his best friend stole all the money. And there's two basic types of solutions. The first solution is that the friend comes back, gives back all the money plus 10% interest, apologizes, says it'll never happen again. I was on drugs, or the mafia made me do it, whatever the story is.
And the butterflies and rainbows come out.
Right. So one solution is the practical solution. That is the physical problem, the physical circumstances, the actual event dynamics are where the solution is. So it happens like in the physical world. So the person comes back, brings back the money, apologizes, does it with interest, says he'll work free for a year, but makes amends. And so the conflict is resolved. And then literally, at least in the psycho-emotional world, if there's that practical solution, having relieved the conflict over the indigestible experience, then the extra cells in the stomach really just slough off and it goes away. Even though medically it might be something that would require surgery or even removing the stomach, if the emotional root is cleared, the extra cells, which, from the medical standpoint, as someone who's done all the training at the level of the top schools in the country, from the medical standpoint, we'd say, well, he might have been consuming carcinogens in his food, and he had a genetic predisposition to that issue, and he was drinking too much alcohol. That was a predisposing factor. Maybe he was a smoker, which raised that factor. Maybe he took certain medications that might have been a predisposition to it, and he was under a lot of stress, and he had certain bacteria in his stomach. That all these factors, taken all together, his microbiome was not ideal. That resulted in this aggressive proliferation of cells that was a danger to him. That would be from the medical, biochemical, cell biology perspective. And the solution to that would be the usual medical interventions, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, immune modulation, and so forth. Whereas at the deep level of the psyche, it's the brain creating a super stomach to digest what's indigestible. And one of the key points here is that while we're talking about physical cells, as far as the psyche is concerned, there is not a difference. It's processed this essentially the same, or at least similarly, whether it's real, imaginary, symbolic, or metaphoric.
Mm-hmm.
So if it can be any of those, so it doesn't have to be real, it can just be imagined. It can be a metaphor, it can be symbolic, that the brain will take that and create the solution. So if there's a metaphoric indigestible experience, that can also cause the process to code. Now, what's key to understanding, and what I really think is astounding about this whole body of work, and I'm not a creator of it, I'm simply a student of it that finds the knowledge profound and kind of a missing link in creating an optimal health and well-being platform, which is, depending upon that perceived experience, it actually codes to a particular part of the brain. And if the stress is built up long enough and intensely enough, it can actually be seen on a CAT scan as an area that looks like you dropped a pebble in the water and there's an expanding ring from that point. And that center point is the point of where that particular type of perceived stress codes into the brain. And when it codes into that particular part of the brain, it also translates to the organ affected. So to understand where to go without, there's a whole different discussion about how you, upon knowing the conflict, assist someone to actually get to it in their own conscious understanding. In terms of the dynamic of understanding what the conflict is, based on the diagnosis, we know the conflict. Based on a CAT scan that shows an affected particular part of the brain, we know the conflict. And based on what the patient or person describes, we know the conflict. So, but once we know the part that's affected, the diagnosis, or the part of the brain, once you know any of those pieces, we know the whole thing. Because each it's a unit thing, right? It's a whole map. So if we know that the stomach is affected, we know the part of the brain that's affected, and we know the types of conditions that will arise from it. And because we know the conflicts, then we can go about the next part of the equation. So if there isn't the practical solution, then the question is, how do we release the trauma of the experience, the trauma and the isolation of it, so that the brain is no longer having to create a super organ, in this case, a super stomach. And that's where you really get into the art of the process. And the core course that is taught by Enrique Boran originally, and now Mary Kennedy has also been approved to teach the first and second modules, as have I, though I'm doing a lot of other things. So I'm letting her, how you say, take the baton on that part of the equation. That really teaches the psycho-emotional anatomy. It teaches the landscape. It teaches of what translates to what. So organ system by organ system, there are particular conflicts. And even with one diagnosis over another, there are subhues of those conflicts that are related. So there's like a general paradigm for an organ system, and then depending upon the particular part of that organ system and the way it's affected, there are further subhues and further refinements of the understanding of the conflict. So for example, Steve Jobs succumbed to pancreatic cancer, but it was an unusual kind. Do you know the story?
No, I can't remember the story. I know it was pancreatic cancer, but I don't remember the whole story.
Mm-hmm. Well, typical pancreatic cancer is cancer of the head of the pancreas, adenocarcinoma, and that tends to be conflicts over inheritance, actually. And I'm actually seeing a few cases like that. And in contrast, though, the type of tumor that Steve Jobs had was cancer of the tail of the pancreas. And it was an unusual hormone secreting tumor called the glucagonoma. And what's interesting is that the conflict for cancer of the tail of the pancreas, as opposed to the more common type of the head of the pancreas, is the conflict of not having the name of the father. And Steve Jobs was adopted. So he didn't have the name of the father. He never actually got over that conflict, or else he wouldn't have developed that particular type of tumor and that unusual part of that organ. And that's how specific it is.
Wow, that's fascinating. For someone to heal from trauma from this perspective, do they need to then completely recognize with the conflict? Or like I'm thinking sometimes when people have, when it opens up kind of what healing actually means then, but sometimes when people have spontaneous healings and they literally like go into a different state or a different resonance where that disease state no longer kind of resonates at that same sort of frequency or vibration or however you would look at it, and that the disease just no longer is sort of fits in with that realm anymore. But would then, when they come out of that state, would then that disease probably come back if there hasn't been an awareness of the conflict and a resolution with the conflict?
It's probably the case that when there is a quote unquote spontaneous healing, whatever it is, that the person has undergone a self-decoding process. You know, whatever it was in their environment, or whatever discussion they had, or whatever internal dialogue they had, that they effectively got to the root of the emotional origin of the issue, found the emotion of it, felt and processed the emotion, and were consciously aware of it, and that de-stresses it, the brain can heal, and the affected organ related to it can heal. So in those cases, I think it's generally the case that the reason for the healing is that there has been that shift in awareness, that release of the core issue, the emotional processing of it, and that means it should be essentially permanently relieved. It's unlikely to come back when in situations where that happens. So when we know the conflict, it's then the art of understanding how to give that person a backdoor into their subconscious. It's sort of like, I don't know if you saw the movie Lawnmower Man.
No. I'll have to put that on the list, though.
The original was great. It's like one of those movies where the person who is a relatively simple person becomes, you know, a super powered brainiac and develops more and more abilities. And there's a point where he needs to find a back door into the system to be able to go to his next level. And it's kind of similar to that. It's like hunting for the back door. And the art of decoding is simply asking the right questions that create awareness. And it can be very quick and because it's so precise, there are times that as little as one question is all it takes. So, I like to go for 3 questions. Most practitioners do an hour to hour and a half initial process because there are also cycles of time. So, for example, the person who has the friend who stole all his money, it's an indigestible experience, but that might not be his only indigestible experience. That could just be the most recent on a series of those. And it's the series of them that are continuing to build this conflict energy of that particular type of conflict in that particular part of the brain. So the questions would be focused around, things that happened to them that were indigestible. So it would be asking questions about, how did you perceive that when that happened? And get them to come to their own conclusion about it being indigestible, really talk about it. Because the key of a shock or trauma that gets coded in the brain, and what's damaging about it from the personal perspective is that when you bury this shock experience in the brain, not only are you creating this stimulus where the brain is working with the cells of the body to create so-called special solutions of survival. And that literally means what the brain is doing to the cells of the body so we survive into the next moment. And if that means creating what might be called a cancer today, the brain doesn't really care if something might kill you 5 or 10 years from now. The brain cares about you living into the next moment. Because you may or may not procreate 10 years from now, but you could procreate in the next moment.
Right. Is there, when you're doing the psycho-emotional medicine, when they're making the connections and stuff, is there a process involved in that in the different stages that take place where they do get into the feeling state or back into the body? I know, talking to a lot of other people, there's an importance of getting back into the body and feeling sensation in the body. Does that arise naturally? Do you find when you're working with people, when the conflict is recognized, is there a part where that takes place?
Having the person experience the feeling is really important to get the clearing of it. One of the types of cases that are fun and easy are shoulder cases, rotator cuff injuries or frozen shoulders.
Yeah.
Because there's a very specific conflict, and it's usually just 3 questions. And I have like multiple cases and even video testimonials of people. Yeah, my shoulder, and I couldn't move it past 30 degrees for 7 months, and nothing would help. The doctor said maybe in 2 years it'll get better. Maybe I need surgery. And the first question is about the conflict of the shoulder, because the shoulder is about doing new work in the world. So our arms represent our work in the world, and our hands represent what we're doing literally from moment to moment, from day to day, our day-to-day activities. So conflict with your fingers or hands is your conflict with your day-to-day work. But the conflict with the shoulders is starting something new.
Mm-hmm.
And so if someone has a shoulder problem, that something new is going on with them that's big. They have a new job, they're starting a new activity, they've been invited to a new position. So something big is happening, something new, and something that's going to take a lot of time and energy and attention. And the secondary or additional parallel issue of the shoulder is that it's like our wing. And even instinctually, in our evolutionary history, we've kept those close to us under our wing. That's what like birds do, right? They keep the little hatchlings under their wing. Well, if there's a new activity that is going to cost so much time that you can't keep your loved ones under your wing, the brain metaphorically freezes the shoulder. So the first question is to have someone to recall something new that was happening, a new job, activity, hobby, pursuit, invitation that happened in the month or two before the shoulder had the problem. And there's almost always something that's very significant. Yeah, I started this new work. I was creating a new company. I was invited to be the chairman of a nonprofit organization. You know, whatever the case may be, there's something new, big, significant, and it's going to be very time consuming. And so that's the first. So, you know, was there that kind of event? And then were you concerned that you wouldn't be able to take care of your loved ones in the same way? And then it's like, oh yeah, I was afraid that I wouldn't, you know, be there for them, that they wouldn't have what they needed, you know, that you know, they might have a sense of abandonment, whatever, however they process that, with that, the concern about taking care of the people close to them. And then and then often just asking those two questions, they already have like several degrees more mobility just from two questions. And then the third question, because I've often repeated the test even after each question, particularly after the second question, that sets the stage. And the third question is, well, how did it make you feel? And the emotion is where like the deep processing occurs, where they really feel that the conflict of emotions of what it means to them and to the world and their legacy or even their family to do this new thing versus the stress of not being able to have, you know, hands-on, keep under your wing and care for those that you love the most.
Mm-hmm. It's I've seen very much the same things with shoulder injuries too, and my background, I did more. I've done like the neuroemotional technique and some of that work before, but I can say I almost laugh because that was my big tell for myself.
Yeah.
I remember years and years back, I was working, and I'm also an osteopath. So as I'm working on someone doing osteopathic work, I found my left shoulder went actually completely kind of numb. I couldn't even feel it. And I started to get like really deep aching all deep around into my rotator cuff. And so, you know, at that time, it's like, so I would get osteopathic work and massage and chiropractic and all the stuff that sort of on a physical level should have helped it a lot. And it helped a little bit, but really not much at all, or very temporary.
Right.
And so a friend of mine finally came over that does a lot of work in a similar way to I do, that I just, you know, sometimes when you're in it, you can't see it. At least I wasn't able to at that point in time. And so he checked everything out and went through and checked out some of the different imbalances I had. And then he said, and the emotion over responsibility is coming up. He goes, how does that play in for you? And I just was like, just got engaged, just bought a house, just moved into that house with my new stepson and my fiance. Just changed locations of my clinic. It was like, yes. And literally it was within and what was fascinating around it was, it wasn't necessarily like I had to dive in and really, it's like I journaled about it for a bit. I allowed myself to just kind of go there to feel what was happening and bring awareness to it. And I had been working with that for a few months, where it came out of the blue. Well, out of the blue, it wasn't really out of the blue, but it came out, and then literally within about a week, it literally just resolved itself almost instant. And it was so important for me to see that firsthand, just on how much these things play into it, and how easily they can be resolved once the awareness is brought into it.
And how the problem will remain chronic if the emotional root isn't addressed, despite the physical maneuvers to make it better.
Yeah, I think it's all really fascinating. And when you were talking about looking back at, you know, the emotional reactions or the stresses that took place before the physicality, one thing that I think is a really good practical exercise for people to do is a timeline. I'll often have patients do a timeline and sort of do a physical timeline. So wherever they began to however old they are, and put little spikes where they felt they had like either accidents or injuries or bad problems that came up physically, and then do another one that was more sort of stresses, emotional challenges that they dealt with. And they almost always see a spike prior to then the physical spike. And it's another way to just sort of see it, you know, and they almost look and go, oh my gosh, because the brain doesn't seem to process it quite like that organically. So
it's about the awareness ultimately. And like you're describing, just asking those few questions and creating the awareness, I've seen probably the most dramatic is women who literally couldn't lift her arm more than 30 degrees, and in 3 to 5 minutes had complete range of motion.
It's astounding. And I mean, it sounds miraculous, but in many ways, I think it is miraculous when you connect to that, whatever is going to unlock that natural healing capacity of the body to then move again. I did a lot of work with Dr. Jerry Tennant, and he wrote a book called Healing is Voltage. And we'd look at it as, all of these emotions are also in conflicts are related to acupuncture meridians. They're related to fascial chains. They all interrelate. So when we talk about something on this level, it's affecting the flow of chi energy through those areas. It's affecting the fascial chains through those areas. So once that resolves, all of a sudden the flow gets back. And think of it like a kink in a garden hose. It's if that a conflict is the kink, and all of a sudden it disappears. Boom, you've got access now to that full flow again.
Right. Exactly. And it's important to note for people that may begin delving into this area that when someone gets to the root of the conflict, when they become consciously aware of the stress, when they allow themselves to see it, perceive it, realize the connection, as well as to actually feel the emotion, because the deep healing occurs when the emotion is finally processed and released, that the body may go into repair. So there may actually be physical symptoms when these chronically stressed part of the brain and body organ go into repair. Like there's a period so-called vagotonia, where we go into rest and digest mode, and the tissue may swell, it may temporarily hurt more. And the big things for the person is that this is part of the healing process, and they should celebrate the fact that, it's hurting a bit more now because it's actually healing, and it's going to now be fully healed. Yeah. Otherwise, it creates a new conflict, and that new conflict goes to a different part of the brain. It creates a new organ issue.
Yeah.
You can perpetuate. So it's important for people to realize that there can be some temporary intensification during the repair process.
Yeah. And different people have talked about that before too. I mean, that's Herring's law talks about that in homeopathy. They'll talk about the almost reverse order of certain things that pop back up again, right, as you kind of in the process of cycling back through them again.
Right.
I know we're coming up on time here, Dr. Todd. One thing I'd like to ask, do we have time for two small questions?
2 small questions, sure.
First, I think people would be interested, what are some of the most common conflicts that you do see, and as far as what the conflict is and how that plays out in the body? What are maybe a few of the big ones that you see fairly commonly?
That's a really good question. There's so many conflicts that we see a lot of. Probably, the most common are separation and abandonment conflicts. So lots of people have skin issues, but those are due to separation conflicts. And abandonment conflicts, that's why people gain weight, because they're getting big so they can be safe from the predator, or they get lean and skinny. So those are probably the 2 commonest. And then we see a subset of pretty much everything else, depending upon what comes to us. And I'll share a really interesting story about separation conflicts. And this also gets to the core of understanding. So one of the persons that trained with us, that did our program, and for those that are listening, anyone I'd say that's interested in their own self-evolution, if you yourself want to be an enhanced version of yourself, or a progressively enhanced version of yourself, there's probably little that's more important than literally digging into your psyche and clearing out these programs, beliefs, and particularly unresolved traumas, whether they're yours or your ancestors. Because when you do, the part of the brain that you relieve literally reconnects with the brain. You get more of your brain back, more of your capability back, more of your resilience back, as well as, for yourself and for your ancestors going downward and back up the line, you've solved this for the clan. So there's probably little little else you can do that's going to be more profound for personal enhancement, not only for health, but just for achieving the highest level of capability and performance that is possible. And in that light, particularly when we get through this COVID thing, we do teach programs with the world's leading innovators in this area. And I'll provide you a link to that to get information about who the instructors are and what kind of courses those are. So I really do think it is profound. Like for me, myself, having studied many aspects of health, wellness, and medicine, you know, down to the biochemical level, that what really tied it together, the missing piece of understanding everything and having a methodology that can really get to the root of things and then really regenerate at all levels of being, from the subconscious through the psycho-emotional to the spiritual to the physical, molecular, biochemical, genealogical, genetic, that without the psycho-emotional piece, it's incomplete. So even if someone just does the training for their own self-evolutionary purposes, it's incredibly useful. And then beyond that, for those that are aligned with being practitioners, it's really astounding. Sometimes even just a short session with a few questions can be, you know, profoundly healing and transformative. So this particular case, since we're talking about common conflicts, which is a separation. So the whole idea is that when we are infants, our sense of survival is conditioned by contact with mother. You know, when, you know, little orangutans in the field, they're always in contact with their mother, or primates in general, where particularly primates have like constant contact in the vulnerable infant and early childhood stages, that much of the brain is wired to be constantly feeling, you know, even, you know, a dime-sized area of conflict. And if there's a separation, literally the brain creates skin that has more surface area. That's, you know, causes erosions and ulcers, so that there's more surface, so that the brain can feel more contact. And this particular case was a woman, I think she was about 20, and one of the practitioners we trained did a session with her, and her problem began when she was an infant. And another principle is that a child, a young child especially, the first years, but even up to the age of 7, a child may develop a physical problem because they're becoming the biological solution for the unresolved conflicts of their parents. And in this particular case, when she was an infant, her father, I believe, was in the military and was absent a lot. And the mom was really stressed about the father being absent. And the separation conflict resulted in the infant having eczema. And so throughout her life, you know, for her 20 years, she was getting constant outbreaks. And then when the practitioner heard this, he realized that it wasn't even hers. Like the conflict came from the mother's big stress that she was a biological solution for. And the practitioner said, well, you know what? That's a separation conflict, but it wasn't even yours. It was your mother's when you were a baby, and you just haven't realized it yet, so your brain can let go of it. So it's not yours. You can let go of it. And before his eyes, it just disappeared.
Yeah, yeah. I think too, in so many ways with kids, like kids play that role. I mean, they become a mirror in so many ways for parents. Sometimes it's obvious, and sometimes it's beneficial, and sometimes it's challenging. But I know even like just with our kids, it's like you see that all the time. If you're looking, you'll see that kids can be a mirror for all sorts of things that we're going through, or that they're reflecting in a way for us. And as soon as we kind of resolve it, it's no longer there anymore. So.
Mm-hmm. And let me just describe the different flavors of what's available for those that may be interested. So I first learned about this from Enrique Buran, who is in the lineage of Hammer. He learned directly from Claude Sabat, and Hammer and Sabat together decoded about 500 conditions. And Enrique on his own has decoded 1,000 more. So he is like a king of decoding. He loves to like find the decodings for things. He's really great at it. And he teaches the general psycho-emotional landscape, the concepts of creating Hammer foci, the areas in the brain. And so it's really kind of the whole psycho-emotional anatomy, and then sort of the basic ways to use that information to create the decoding for the person and get the healing for them and their genealogy. Then there's another student of Claude Sabat, Isabelle Benarous, and her specialty is using additional techniques, particularly combining the decoding with NLP, to have even more tools and techniques for once you know the conflict, how you achieve the decoding. That can include creating a timeline for that person and literally recreating your past. So akin to what you were describing. Even a step further, not just finding the relationship between the physical injury points and the emotional stress points, but actually going back in time and rewriting the timeline.
Nice. Oh, that sounds fascinating.
Cool. And the third, I just want to get this in because it's really crazy, is that there is a third flavor, and this is the really wild, spooky, esoteric stuff, which is dental decoding.
Yeah. Well, actually, while you're even saying dental decoding, let me just pull something up here, because this is a chart that and it might be different, but this is a chart that I've used in my clinic for a long time. And so we'll look at the different teeth and how they relate to different emotions. And this might be a more simplistic version of what you're talking about, but the idea that the different teeth, they're all related to different meridians, they're all related to different emotions, and I'm assuming related to very different conflicts probably. So yeah, share with me that, because I think that's it's a piece that most people can't even comprehend, the interrelationships that go on with the body and the mind.
Well, the dental stuff is really wild. And the person teaching us there is Dr. Fabian Brotos. He is from Uruguay and is a third-generation orthodontist. And the emotions that you put for each tooth are accurate, and it goes deeper than that. Because they're teeth that represent mother and father, grandmother and grandfather, and various types of genealogic as well as personal conflicts. So it's that information and more layers of it. It is to the point that for Dr. Brotos, if he has a panographic x-ray of someone's teeth, which is basically all 32 teeth in their position, you find that everything means something. There are over 100 different types of cavities and many different ways that teeth can malposition. There can be spaces between the teeth. There can be different openings of the oral cavity, different projections of the jaw, and everything means something. So if you give him a panographic x-ray of the mouth and teeth, he can literally provide that person a 32-chapter book about their life, relationships, genealogy, and emotional conflicts without their saying a word.
Wow.
It's super cool. And whenever someone has come to the question, well, this tooth never came in, or the other one came in impacted, and this one was removed when I was 13 years old, every single time so far, he's been 100% accurate with the dynamics that represented. It's really interesting.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Dr. Todd, last question is, given everything that's gone on over this past, gosh, like year and a half now almost, or getting close, any kind of conflicts that you can see that might be arising just from the whole mishmash of all of it? I mean, everything from, I think the fears are originally around health, and all of the stuff that's come up from that with all of the measures that have been taking place. I mean, there's a world of stuff to talk about with all that, but just the entire series of things that have gone on, I feel like that's been traumatic for a lot of people. And I'm kind of thinking, like, are we going to see a big flood of traumatic sort of injuries that are going to come up after all of this?
Certainly. Of course we are. That's obvious.
Well,
but let me give a different insight, because it's really fascinating, which is the core conflict of SARS-CoV-2. Are you interested?
Yes. Yes, I think everybody is.
So it's become a pandemic. It influences the whole world, which suggests if there's a conflict underneath it, that it should be a widely held conflict for people of different, cultures, ethnicities, and backgrounds. And I actually got 2 decodings. The first I got was from Isabel, and the other is from Enrique, and they're both profoundly insightful. So the general conflict, like this widely held conflict in humanity that's related to the COVID-19, is I can't recognize who the enemy is. So who is the enemy? Is it the virus itself? Is it engineering in a lab that created it? Is it people that let it out? Is it the secret government? Is it our politicians? Is it our medical system that doesn't account for it? Is it the medical leaders that are maybe not giving us all the information? I can't recognize who the enemy is. And then Enrique's, which is very similar but a little bit different flavor, because words mean something. Words have their own significance, and often the decodings are actually within the words or in that person's name or in their ancestor's name. And Enrique's very similar but slightly different flavor is that the name given is coronavirus. And what does corona mean?
Crown.
Crown. So the other decoding is, I don't know who's wearing the crown.
Yeah, definitely on the same line. Yeah.
Right. So that's the general globalized conflict that's behind it all. Now, the people that actually succumb to the respiratory issues, then they have the conflicts of the bronchial tubes and the lungs. So that gets into a deeper aspect of it. But the core aspect of it is I can't recognize who the enemy is. I don't know who's wearing the crown. And isn't that like a general conflict among humanity?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say that's a major conflict that's going on right now in humanity.
And
that's really fascinating.
What information do you trust? What source of information do you trust? I mean, right, we have government-led institutions for protecting our health. And then I think there's a question, are they doing the best job? Are there vested interests? Are there hidden agendas? Maybe.
Yeah. Do you find before the conflict gets the resolution, does it end up having to almost come up to a head before the resolution actually takes place?
It may. Things need to come into awareness.
Yeah. So I feel like that's the phase we're at right now, is I feel like the shuffling of everything is the awareness that's coming up to then hopefully reach the awareness to see the conflict to then actually have the resolution of the conflict. So
that's right.
Beautiful. Dr. Todd, I so love talking with you and feel like I could still bring you back probably every week and we could just keep this going. So that may not work for your schedule, but we'll definitely plan something else again in the future here. And Dr. Todd, where can people learn about all of this work? So I mean, there's a lot of practitioners that listen to this program too. So I know after I was going through it, I think both Tay and I will probably do a bunch of the courses that you've got on there. I mean, I'm fascinated by it, and I really loved New German medicine before, and then the work with like NET and all of that stuff. It's like, this just feels to me like it just goes, I'm always wanting to get like the essence of it, and sometimes you kind of see lots of value in different courses, but I really do feel like the work that you guys are doing here is like really detailed.
It's the art of it, and not that we have developed it, but we love what has been so insightfully created and find it very useful. And as someone who's trained in conventional medicine, where anatomy and physiology drives a lot of our understanding, isn't it cool that you can overlay an emotional map on the whole system as well? And you can be precise and targeted, as opposed to hunting through a list of 500 emotions to find what might be relevant for that person.
Yeah.
Like, even knowing the body part that's affected, well, I know the conflict of the ring finger versus the thumb, the conflict of the elbow versus the shoulder or the hip. And that's a good place to start. Even when I do our rejuvenation procedures, if someone has a localized area, if they're receptive to it, I will ask the decoded questions related to that particular area.
Nice.
Yeah.
So where can people learn more about that work?
Well, I'll give you a link. to a place that if people want information about psycho-emotional medicine, they can sign up just to get information about the courses taught and newsletter type stuff. The general site is mindbodylogic.com. So the mind and body work together in a logical way. That's the whole point. So mindbodylogic.com. And I will send you a link to the page if people want to sign up for more information.
Wonderful. And I'll have links to your other work there too. And if you check out Dr. Todd's previous episodes, you'll see everything there as well. But again, it's like, I really think the work you're doing is so profound and in so many different areas, but they ultimately still kind of get all pulled together. So we so appreciate your time too, Dr. Todd. And well, if we can get connected up for this series, we will be trying to bring back maybe for a live again at some point when this series airs. And
Sure.
If we can, we'll try and connect it up again with some of the groups where we do the round tables. So those are always fun.
That'd be great. Enjoyed the last one quite a lot.
Super. Yeah, we've had lots of great feedback from it. So a lot of people in tears when they were listening to your music that we got back. So I always think that's great. So Huna Flash calls it the crocodile tears that need to come out at some point. So or the dragon tears, sorry, that he says need to come out.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right, Dr. Todd, much love to you. And thank you again so much. And we'll touch base soon, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.